So this is going to be a very quick and dirty, rough introduction to what music theory is, how I want to sort of think about it, and sort of uh, give you access to a world of understanding music in a really short amount of time. So the first thing is, what is music theory? Essentially, I want to think of music theory as just the language to be able to talk about what things sound like, how things work in music. That's all it is. It's not a set of rules or a set of guidelines or a set of, X, Y, and Z. Those exist within the context of music theory for specific styles of music, because each style of music is going to have its own sort of language, and like language, it's going to have its own syntax and sort of properties of construction. But on a more basic level, theory is just what we use to talk about music. So when we're thinking about what music is and what music theory is, I want to get away from the notion of what makes a song is the notes. Like if I play E, D, C, D, E, 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 that, oh, those notes are Mary Had a Little Lamb. Because it's not really about the notes, it's about the relationships between the notes. That's what makes a song a song. So I could take those same relationships and move them up to a different spot on the keyboard. It's still going to sound like Mary Had a Little Lamb. So we really want to start by, if we're going to understand music theory, we need to understand the spacing of notes. So I'm going to switch over to my piano keyboard camera, and we're going to look at that over there. So everything we do on the keyboard applies to all other instruments, but it's easier to see on the keyboard because you can see the arrangement of the white keys and black keys all laid out in front of you. And we're going to start with the most basic thing, which on the piano is from one key to the very next key next door. That is a half step or a semitone. So if we just play every key on the keyboard, that's all half steps. And that is the most basic distance we can have on the keyboard. If we go up a half step and then we go up another half step, this distance, 2 keys with another key in between, is called a whole step. So from this black key to this black key, where the white key is in between, that's another whole step right here with the black key in between. Here, because there's no, we've got 2 white keys next to one another, I would go black key, this would be the half step, this would be the whole step, right? And so we've got these half steps and whole steps, and we add them up to make some basic sorts of things. So with that, we can start building out some basic patterns. And probably the most basic pattern, and you probably already know some of these, is the major scale. So if I start on C and I play to the next C using all the white keys, I get the major scale. And specifically, I get the C major scale, right? And we can figure out what this is a little bit in more detail by looking at the half steps and whole steps, by looking at the spaces of it. So from C to D, I'm skipping over a note, that's going to be a whole step. C to D is a whole step. From D to E, that's a whole step. Again, I'm skipping the black key. E to F, that's a half step. There's no black key here. They're right next to one another. F to G, that's a whole step again. I'm skipping over the black key. G to A is a whole step, skipping over the black key. A to B is a whole step, skipping over the black key. And B to C is a half step, no black key to skip over here. They're just close as can be. So in total, we get the first notes for free. We get whole step, half step. Whole, half. Then we have a linking whole step. And then we do the same pattern again. Whole, half. So the pattern for a major scale is whole, half, linking whole step, whole, half. And the thing is, when we talk about what a major scale is one of each letter name in order using a specific pattern of half steps and whole steps. A major scale is whole, half, linking whole step, whole, whole, half. And I can start on any key on the keyboard and apply the pattern of whole, whole, half, linking whole step, whole, whole, half, and I will build out that major scale. So let's do that now. I'm going to start on G. And we always get the first note for free because a whole step is a distance, and we have to have a starting point in order to travel and go someplace to move a distance. So we start on G, we go up whole step, half step. First whole step takes us to A. Second whole step takes us to B. Third is a half step, and that takes us to C. So G, whole step, half step gives us G, A, B, C. Then we have our linking whole step. From C, we go to D, right? Now we do our whole, whole, half again. Whole step from D is E. Whole step from E, I have to skip over F. It pushes us up onto the F to the right, which is F sharp. Sharps move us to the right a half step. And then a half step at the end brings us to G. So the G major scale would be G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp, G, right? And when we play a song in the key of G, what we mean is that primarily, this is the set of notes we're going to use. G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp, G. And then we could do other keys as well. So if I did D, whole step, skipped a key, whole step, skipped a key, half step, right next door, whole step, skip a key, whole step, skip a key, whole step pushes me up onto the black key, half step, there's my scale. Now I have two sharps, D, E, F sharp. I know it's an F sharp because F is the next note in the pattern, right? D, E, next note's got to be some version of F. I need F to the right, so it'd be F sharp, G, A, B, C sharp, and D. And then every single key has its own unique set of notes when we apply that pattern to it. I want to look at the F scale. F, up a whole step is G, up a whole step is A, up a half step from A is going to be this key, and people often think to call it A sharp, but we already have A. And when I said the rules for a major scale, I said it's one of each note name in order. So because I already have an A, I can't have another A. F, G, A. I need to call this B something. So it's B to the left, and left is, when we move a note to the left, that is flat. So F, G, A, B flat, whole step to C, and then we do whole, whole, half again. Whole step to D, whole step to E, half step to F. And that's our F major scale. So that's a little bit about sort of scales, and each scale gives us sort of a world that we call a key signature that we can work in. And we can do some stuff with that. I'm going to go back to the key of C just because without any white keys, without any black keys in it, it just makes it easier to see. And I'm going to play a basic chord. You know your chords from guitar. So on piano, our chords on the most basic level are going to be every other note named by the leftmost note. So this would be a C chord. This would be a D chord, E chord, F chord, G chord, A chord, B chord, and C chord. And you may know from your guitar, this is not just a C chord, it's a C major chord. And that gives us a little more information, tells us a little bit more about the kind of chord, and we'll talk about what that means in a little bit. This is a D minor chord, E minor chord, F major chord, G major chord, A minor chord, B diminished chord, and a C major chord. We could also name these notes by their relationship to the scale. So the C chord in the key of C, we could call the 1 chord because it's built off of the first note of the C scale. The D chord we could call the 2 chord because it's built off the second note of the C major scale. The E chord would be the 3 chord because it's built off the 1, 2, 3, third note in the C major scale. F chord would be the 4 chord. G chord would be the 5 chord. A chord would be the 6 chord. B chord would be the 7 chord. And then we're back to the 1 chord again, right? And we can just play those going all up in order, and that works. But normally that's not how harmony in songs work. Normally there are kind of patterns that we use. one of the most common ones would be the 4-chord song, which is used in a lot of pop music, which would be the 1 chord, which is a C chord. The 5 chord, which would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the G chord. The 6 chord, which would be up one more to the A. And then the 4 chord, which would be F. And then there are tons of songs that we know that use this pattern. And I find myself in times of trouble, Mother Mary, come to me, speaking words of wisdom, let it be. And it just walks down there at the end, but the basic chord progression is that 1, 5, 6, 4, or just a small town boy living in a lonely world. Tons of songs that use that pattern. And the cool thing about this is when we understand our scale and we understand chords 1, 5, 6, 4, well, we can go to another scale, like the G scale, and I could go, okay, what's the 1 chord in the key of G? Okay, it's a G chord. What's the 5 chord in the G scale of G? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The D chord. And I got to make sure I use the F sharp so that I stay in G world. I stay in with my G scale. Then the 6 chord, which is my E chord, and the C chord would be my 4 chord. 1, 5, 6, 4. And the thing is, it's going to sound the same, right? Maybe a little bit lower, a little bit higher, but it's basically the same thing. Why? Because all of the intervals of the scale are the same, like the C major scale and the G major scale use the same pattern of half steps and whole steps, which means the chords, the 1 chord in the key of G has the same spacing as the 1 chord in the key of C. The 1 chord to the 5 chord in the key of G has all of the same relationships as the 1 chord to the 5 chord in the key of C. And because the spacing is exactly the same, it gives us the power to sort of take something in one key and move it all around. And they're like, well, if there's only, there's only 12 different keys and there's only, 7 chords in a scale, how do we end up with all of this different music? Well, chord progressions get repeated, and what becomes interesting is what you do with it. So I don't have to play my C chord in C, E, G arrangement. I can rearrange those notes. I could play the C, G, and put the E up top here. And it's going to have a very different feel. We can play with rhythm and timing, and there's tons of things that you can mess with in terms of chord progressions. Even taking it just as a very standard progression to find your own unique voice with it. The next thing I want to talk about a little bit is once we get a scale, there are certain notes that have ways that they function. So in a C major scale, the note C functions as a home note. It's called the tonic. And much like, like a tonic as being a healing thing, the tonic releases all of the tension and gives us home. And the 1 chord is called the tonic chord, right? It is the most home we're going to get. Another really important note in the scale would be the 7th note, especially the 7th note when, like in the major scale, it's a half step below the tonic. And the reason that's so important is because, it's called the leading tone. It makes us want to go home. It leads us home. It has this directional pull. It says, go, 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 go. Keep going. Why are you stopping? I want resolution. Oh, thank you, right? And that gets used a lot in the harmonies. So the 1 chord is considered a very stable chord because it's home. It uses the tonic. It puts the tonic as the lowest note, a really stable, happy place. But if I go to the 5 chord, The 5 chord doesn't have any of the notes of home. It doesn't have the C, well, that's not true. It does have the G, but it doesn't have the C and E in it. It just has the G, but it also has the leading tone and the D, so everything around the home note, but not the home note. And all of that creates this pull that says, please go home. So the 5 chord has this feeling of tension, of wanting to go home to it. And then we could look at something like the 4 chord. The 4 chord has the home note, but it has the home note on top in the weakest position, right? All the notes under it are, not part of the 1 chord. And so when I'm describing the function of chords to kids, what I say is your 1 chord is like home. You're familiar, it feels comfortable, it's very relaxed. When you go to the 5 chord, that's your going on an adventure chord. That takes you somewhere. It has motion, it has tension, it has direction. The 4 chord is like going to your aunt's house. It's familiar, you've been there before, you know the tacky statue that she has on the mantle, but at some point you're going to want to go back to home, right? And the 1 chord, 4 chord, and 5 chord, traditionally in classical music, were used in direction 1 chord to the 4 chord, 5 chord, and then back to the 1 chord to resolve it. But in pop music, we rearrange the chords and mix them all up. They mix and match. Now, with that, we want to look at some things that go with it. So, if I'm looking at the 5 chord, I may notice that the 5 chord and the 7 chord share a lot of similarities. They share 2/3 of their notes, and the 7 chord, much like the 5 chord, is kind of surrounding the notes for home, right? And in fact, sometimes they get combined together to make what's called a 5/7 chord, where you get sort of all of them mashed together. And this really, it loves to go back to the 1 chord. It's very tense and dissonant. And it wants to resolve. So the 5 chord and the 7 chord are very similar and can often be subbed in for one another. Similarly, the 4 chord and the 2 chord can often be subbed in for each other. Why is that? Well, the 2 chord uses 2 of the same notes as the 4 chord, right? They share a lot of this common DNA. And much like the 4 chord, the 2 chord doesn't have the leading tone in it. It doesn't have a note to add tension to it. It doesn't have, the 4 chord has the C in it. So the 4 chord feels a little bit more stable. The 2 chord is a little bit, it's minor. It doesn't have the home note in it. So it feels a little bit more unsettled, unstable than the 4 chord, but they can serve the same general purpose. So instead of playing 1, 4, 5, 1, I could play 1 to the 2 chord, and then the 5 chord, and then the 1 chord. And they feel similar, but you can hear a little bit different. A little difference in there. I could also maybe do a 1, 2, 7, and to the 1 again. So these chords have functions often based on their relationship to the home note in the scale and the leading tone in the scale. From there, we can get really creative with how we build out chords, how we use chords, the types, where we move in terms of chord progressions. We can also do things where we borrow from other keys, where we start to bend chords. So if I take 1, 5, 6, 4, I can take the 1 chord, and instead of playing the 5 chord as major, I can play the 5 chord as minor. And it's gonna work. It sounds new and different. So we can start bending chords in different directions, borrowing from other harmonies. That gets into more complicated things. But it sort of shows you how, with a basic framework and thinking about relationships, you can take the idea of a scale and then figuring out the chords, build out chord progressions, and then start to get creative with that as a foundation. And you can also use those chords and everything to start to direct some of your ideas melodically, which is all the stuff we're going to start working on and looking at as we get into theory. So hopefully this is helpful. What I would encourage you to do is spend some time looking at any major scales you know and thinking about the distances between the notes, going over that pattern of whole, whole, half, whole step, whole, whole, half. Because the more that you can see the spacing between things, the more powerful your understanding of theory and what's happening is going to be. I hope everything's okay, and I look forward to seeing you next week.